Have you ever noticed that financial emergencies never ask whether it's a good time? They never check your bank account first. They never wait until you get your next paycheck. Instead, they seem to arrive at the exact moment you're least prepared. One day, everything feels manageable. Then your car starts making a strange sound during your morning commute. A few hours later, an unexpected bill lands in your inbox. The next morning, your employer sends you a message that begins with the words, "Can we talk?" Suddenly, you're not thinking about your future goals anymore. You're thinking about survival. You're wondering whether one unexpected expense could completely derail your month. And for millions of people, that's not a hypothetical situation. That's everyday life. Here's the scary part. The biggest financial problem most people face isn't debt. It isn't inflation. It isn't even low income. It's the fact that they have absolutely no margin for error. One surprise expense creates another problem. That problem creates another. And before long, a small inconvenience turns into a full-blown financial crisis. But what if you could change that in the next 60 days? What if you could build a financial buffer that protects you from life's random punches? Even if you're convinced there's no money left to save? Because in this video, I'm going to show you a practical, psychology-based system for building an emergency fund from almost nothing. And stay with me until the end, because most people think emergency funds fail for one obvious reason. They spend the money. But that's usually not what happens. In fact, many people who successfully build an emergency fund still end up losing it. Not because they're irresponsible, not because they lack discipline, but because of a psychological trap that quietly convinces them an emergency isn't really an emergency. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how that trap works and how to avoid it before it destroys months of progress. Let's start with a question that completely changes the conversation. Part 1. Why most people wait too long to start. Most people believe emergency funds are something you build after your finances improve, after the raise arrives, after the debt disappears, after life becomes less stressful, after everything finally settles down. But have you ever noticed that life rarely settles down on its own? There is always another expense. There is always another obligation. There is always another reason to delay. That's why waiting to save is often what keeps people trapped. Think about it this way. Imagine someone says they will buy car insurance after they get into an accident. That sounds ridiculous. The whole purpose of insurance is protection before something goes wrong. An emergency fund works exactly the same way. Don't build it because your life is already stable. You build it because life isn't stable. The emergency fund creates stability. That shift in thinking is incredibly important because many people spend years believing they need financial security before they can save, when the reality is that saving is often what creates the security they're looking for. And before you assume this only applies to people who are careless with money, consider this. Many financially stressed people understand exactly what they should do. The problem isn't knowledge. The problem is behavior. Which brings us to something most financial advice completely ignores: your brain. Part 2. Your brain is secretly working against you. Most financial advice sounds simple. Spend less, save more. Invest the difference. On paper, that sounds reasonable. In real life, it often falls apart. Why? Because humans don't make decisions like calculators. We make decisions like humans. We respond to emotions. We respond to stress. We respond to uncertainty. And when money becomes tight, your brain changes the way it operates. Psychologists often refer to this as scarcity thinking. When resources feel limited, your attention narrows dramatically. Your brain becomes obsessed with immediate problems. Future problems start feeling less important. Long-term planning becomes harder. Short-term relief becomes more attractive. That's why somebody can genuinely want to save money, while simultaneously making purchases that hurt their savings goals. The issue isn't intelligence. The issue is mental bandwidth. Imagine you've spent the last 2 weeks worrying about bills. Every unexpected expense feels urgent. Every decision feels heavier than it should. By the end of the day, your brain isn't looking for the best financial decision. It's looking for relief. That's why people often spend money when they're stressed. Not because they don't understand money, because stress changes what feels important in the moment. And that's dangerous. Because financial problems rarely come from one catastrophic mistake. They usually come from dozens of small decisions that feel harmless individually, but become expensive collectively. Which means solving the problem requires more than knowledge. It requires a system that still works when you're tired, stressed, distracted, and busy. And before we build that system, you need to understand exactly what's at stake. Because the cost of having no emergency fund is much larger than most people think. Part 3. The financial domino effect. Let's imagine 2 different people. Both receive an unexpected $500 expense. Maybe it's a car repair. Maybe it's a medical bill. Maybe it's an emergency home repair. Expense is exactly the same, but the outcome is completely different. For person number 1, the original $500 expense is only the beginning. The repair goes onto a credit card. Interest starts accumulating. A utility bill gets delayed. A late fee appears. The next paycheck arrives already partially spoken for. Suddenly, the real cost isn't $500 anymore. It's $500 plus interest, plus penalties, plus weeks of financial stress. The original problem multiplies. The original $500 problem starts creating additional problems. Now look at person number 2. The repair is still annoying. The expense is still unexpected. But the situation stops there. The money comes from savings. The problem gets handled. Life moves forward. That's the real purpose of an emergency fund. It's not about becoming wealthy. It's about preventing small problems from multiplying. I call this the financial domino effect. One expense knocks over another, then another, then another. Soon you're dealing with consequences that are far larger than the original issue. An emergency fund acts like a wall that stops those dominoes from falling. And here's the surprising part. That wall doesn't need to be enormous. Many people assume they need $10,000 before an emergency fund becomes useful. That's simply not true. A few $100s can dramatically change your situation. $1,000 can completely change how you experience financial stress. Because financial confidence doesn't come from perfection. It comes from having options. Which raises an important question. How much should you actually try to save in the next 60 days? The answer might be far smaller than you expect. Part 4. The 60-day target. When people create financial goals, they often make one critical mistake. They choose a number so large that it feels impossible. Maybe they hear they need 6 months of expenses saved. Maybe they calculate the number. Maybe it comes out to $15,000. Maybe $20,000. Maybe even more. The moment they see that number, their motivation disappears. The goal feels too far away. So, they never begin. That's why we're going to use a completely different approach. Instead of focusing on the final destination, We're focusing on the first layer of protection. Our target is $600 within 60 days. Could you save more? Absolutely. If you can reach $1,000 or beyond, that's fantastic. But the purpose of this challenge is to create momentum and protection quickly. Let's break it down. $600 over 60 days equals $10 per day. When people hear that number, they often respond immediately. I don't have $10 a day. That's a fair reaction. But here's the key insight. We're not trying to physically set aside $10 every single day. We're trying to build a system that creates the equivalent of $10 per day. Some of it will come from reducing waste. Some of it will come from changing spending behavior. Some of it will come from increasing income. Some of it will come from automation. The goal is not sacrifice. The goal is efficiency. And the first step of that system is probably not what you expect. Most people think day one should be about saving money. Actually, day one is about changing where your money lives. Because if you get this next step wrong, everything else becomes much harder. Part 5. The biggest mistake people make on day one. Imagine you decide to build an emergency fund. You move money into your checking account. You tell yourself you're not going to touch it. Then something happens. You open your banking app. You see a larger balance. Your brain immediately starts treating that money as available. Think about what happens when you unexpectedly receive a tax refund or a bonus. Even if you plan to save it, your brain often starts spending it before the money is even used. Suddenly, there are things you need, things you deserve, things that suddenly seem urgent. Nothing changed except the number you saw on a screen. That's how powerful account visibility can be. Not protected, available. That's the problem. Money that sits next to spending money often gets spent. Not because you're irresponsible, because your environment makes spending easier than saving. That's why your emergency fund needs separation. Not tomorrow, today. Open a separate savings account. Create a second banking bucket. Use a completely different financial app if necessary. The goal is to create distance. Then rename the account. Don't call it savings. Call it something specific. Emergency only. Life buffer. Do not touch. Whatever makes the purpose obvious. This sounds simple, maybe even silly. But behavioral psychology shows that people treat money differently when it has a clearly defined purpose. And what happens next becomes even more important. Because in the next section, we're going to build the automatic system that removes motivation from the equation entirely. Most people rely on discipline. We're going to use something much more powerful. Part 6. Building a system that works without motivation. If saving money depended on motivation, almost nobody would succeed long term. Because motivation is inconsistent. Some days you feel disciplined. Some days you feel exhausted. Some days you feel focused. Some days you feel overwhelmed. So instead of relying on motivation, we build automation. This is where your emergency fund stops being a decision and starts becoming a process. The first rule is simple but powerful. Set up an automatic transfer. Not weekly if you can avoid it. Not monthly if possible. Right after payday. That timing matters more than people realize. Because the moment money enters your account, your brain starts assigning it priorities. Rent, food, bills, entertainment, spending. If saving happens last, it usually never happens. But if saving happens first, everything adjusts around it. Even if the amount is small, $5 per day, $10 per day, $25 per week. It does not matter at the beginning. What matters is consistency without friction. Because friction is where most financial habits collapse. Every time you force yourself to make a decision, you create an opportunity to skip it. Automation removes that decision entirely. And once that system is running, we move to the next phase. Because saving alone is not enough. You also need to find money that is currently leaking out of your life. And most people are surprised by how much they find once they actually look. Part 7. Finding your first $100 without changing your life. Before you try to earn more money or drastically cut your lifestyle, you need early wins. Not because $100 is life-changing, but because proof changes behavior. Your brain needs evidence that progress is possible. So, we start with speed, not perfection. Step 1. The hidden subscription audit. Go through your bank statements from the last 30 days. Look for anything recurring. Streaming services. Apps you forgot about. Free trials that turned into paid plans. Memberships you stopped using. Software subscriptions. Even small charges matter. Because the goal is not just saving money. The goal is stopping unconscious spending. Cancel at least one thing immediately, even if it's only $8 or $12 per month. Because that single cancellation represents a behavioral shift. You are now someone who questions automatic spending. Step 2. The impulse delay rule. For the next 60 days, every non-essential purchase must wait. Not forever. Just 48 to 72 hours. This is one of the most effective psychological tools for reducing spending because impulse purchases rely on emotional intensity. And emotional intensity fades with time. Most things you really want today will feel unnecessary in 2 days. Not everything, but enough to make a meaningful difference. Step 3. The one weekend cash conversion. Now we focus on physical items in your environment. Look around your home. Not emotionally valuable items. Unused items. Clothes you don't wear. Electronics you don't use. Accessories sitting in drawers. Equipment collecting dust. The goal is simple. Turn unused objects into liquid cash. One focused weekend. One selling effort. One reset. Even modest results matter here. $50. $100. $200. All of it goes directly into your emergency fund. Because at this stage, momentum matters more than optimization. And once that momentum starts building, we shift into something even more powerful. Because cutting expenses can only take you so far. At some point, you need to increase your income capacity. Part 8. Increasing income without building a business. When people hear increase your income, they often imagine something overwhelming. Starting a business, building a brand, launching a side hustle empire. That is not what we need here. We are working within a 60-day window. We need speed, not complexity. Here's a mistake many people make. They spend weeks searching for the perfect side hustle, the perfect freelance opportunity, the perfect business idea. Meanwhile, 60 days pass and their emergency fund is still sitting at zero. Your goal is financial protection. Speed matters more than optimization. The question isn't, what's the most scalable way to make money? The question is, what's the fastest legal way to create an extra $100 this week? Those are completely different questions. And the second one is usually much easier to answer. So instead, we focus on simple, high-return actions. Option 1, extra work hours. This is the most underrated strategy. Overtime, extra shifts, weekend work, temporary assignments. Even a small increase in hours can generate significant short-term cash flow. Because unlike side businesses, there is no setup time, no learning curve, no delay, just immediate income. Option 2, fast skill monetization. You likely already have skills that someone will pay for. Tutoring, writing, design, editing, translation, basic technical support, administrative help. Many people underestimate their own abilities because they feel ordinary. But ordinary skills solve real problems. And real problems get paid for. Option 3, the one-weekend income sprint. Use a single weekend and dedicate it entirely to income generation. Not casually, not passively. Fully intentionally. Delivery work. Moving assistance. Cleaning services. Freelance gigs. Local jobs. Task-based work. The goal is simple. Generate $100 to $300 in 48 hours. It may feel intense, but remember the time frame. This is not your permanent lifestyle. This is a short-term financial reset. And every dollar generated here accelerates your emergency fund timeline significantly. Even if you succeed in saving money and increasing income, there is still one final layer most people ignore. And this is the part that determines whether your emergency fund actually survives. Part 9. Why most emergency funds fail. Most people assume the hardest part is building the money. But that is not true. The hardest part is keeping it untouched. Because once money exists in your account, your brain begins negotiating with it. A small inconvenience appears. Then a justification appears. It's not a real emergency. I'll replace it later. It's just this once. This is where emergency funds slowly disappear. Not in one big decision, but in small emotional compromises. To prevent that, you need rules before temptation shows up. Rule 1. Define emergency in advance. Emergency is not vague. It is specific. It includes things like health-related urgent issues, housing stability problems, transportation required for income, essential utilities, real unavoidable crises. Everything else is not an emergency. Not convenient spending, not opportunities, not emotional decisions. Clarity removes negotiation. Rule 2. The rebuild rule. If you withdraw from your emergency fund, the next financial priority is rebuilding it. Not upgrading your lifestyle, not adding new goals, not expanding spending. Rebuilding protection comes first. Because without protection, every financial setback becomes larger than it needs to be. Part 10. The real reason this system works. At this point, you might think this is just about saving money, but it's not. It's about reducing psychological pressure. Because financial stress does something subtle but powerful. It narrows your thinking. It reduces your decision quality. It increases impulsive behavior. It makes small problems feel overwhelming. But an emergency fund changes that dynamic. Even a small buffer creates mental space. You stop reacting. You start responding. You stop panicking. You start planning. Imagine two people facing the same unexpected expense. One has no savings. The other has $600 set aside. The situation is identical, but the emotional experience is completely different. One feels trapped. The other feels capable. That difference is the entire point. Not wealth, not status, not perfection. Just stability under pressure. And once you experience that shift, financial behavior naturally improves in almost every area of your life. your next step. So here is the reality. You do not need perfect finances to start. You do not need extra income to begin. You do not need ideal circumstances. You only need a system that starts working immediately. Open a separate account today. Set up a small automatic transfer. Find your first $100 through one action. Cancel something, sell something, or earn something. It does not matter which. What matters is that you start. Because 60 days from now, life will not ask whether you're ready. Unexpected expenses will still happen. Cars will still break down. Bills will still appear. Emergencies will still arrive without warning. The only difference is how you experience them. You can face them with panic, or you can face them with preparation. And that difference starts with the decision you make today.